Saskatchewan has an incredibly high rate of domestic violence. Many women, when they are fleeing situations of abuse, turn to shelters to try to get that support. Now, trans women have a little more difficulty getting into these shelters and finding the same support. I'm standing here with Joanne Duzel, who is the Executive Director of the Provincial Association of Transition Houses and Services of Saskatchewan. Thank you so much for joining me today, Joanne.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about the project, the Safer Transitions project.
Safer Transitions is a partnership between Moose Jaw Pride and Paths to work with our member agencies to provide education, both for the staff and to provide materials perhaps for other clients and people in the community, other community agencies, on how to be more supportive for trans women who are fleeing intimate partner violence.
Tell me a little bit how the project works here in the province.
So the project coordinator is Laura Budd. She is a trans woman who is very excellent at the work she does because she's coming from a very personal place. She tells her own story of what it is like to be a trans woman and face barriers along the way. Oftentimes if you have never met a trans individual, you may have some myths or misconceptions about what that's like. And when you actually meet Laura and talk to her and hear her story, what you do understand is people are people, and trans women have just as much right to safety, support, and shelter as any other women who are fleeing violence.
Tell me a little bit about some of those misconceptions that you mentioned that you come across when you're dealing with trans women.
Well, I think people it's fear-based, right? Because people fear what they don't know. And I don't want to sort of compound the issue by saying things that I don't think are true. So that's kind of a tough question to answer, actually. But I think people fear that, in some way, if a trans woman is in the shelter, it will make it unsafe for the other clients. And that's simply not true. There's no evidence of that. And I think what we do on a case-by-case basis when individuals come into the shelter is we see if they're going to be a fit with the other women in the shelter. And that's the case whether trans, not trans. It's just something that we do in the shelters. I think a big piece of the project will also be developing materials for the other women in the shelter to make them feel more comfortable with having trans women in that space, and just know that they truly are women and they are experiencing not only the same patterns of behavior that other women experience through intimate partner violence, but they actually face higher barriers.
Tell me a little bit more about those barriers. I mean, you mentioned already a little bit, but...
So trans women, research shows that trans women have higher rates of unemployment, higher rates of homelessness, and they're actually quite a bit more likely than any other demographic of women to experience intimate partner violence. Also, for many years, women's shelters were not accessible to trans women, and it's only in recent years, as society has been evolving, that we've really come to realize, these people, they are women. And women, as feminists, as inclusive feminists, we think it's very important to be inclusive and to support other women who are needing safety and support.
Why do you think this program is so important here in Saskatchewan?
I think it's important everywhere, but it's really great to see Saskatchewan kind of leading the country in some ways. In a lot of other provinces, they're not at this stage yet where they're actively working with the shelters to make them welcoming for trans women. So it's something that needs to be done everywhere. We just happen to be among the forefront in doing this work.
You mentioned it's something that you would like to expand. Is that the hope coming out of this project?
Absolutely. We've actually applied for additional funding to continue the project for another year. So we started with a small group of 5 of our member agencies to really work closely with the staff. So they're not just learning the basics, the 101, which terms to use, what is, the right pronoun or language to use with trans women, but also to really live it, to feel comfortable, so that if a trans woman reaches out for support, that the staff really feel comfortable in providing that support and are able to coach other women in the shelter through the process to understand we're all people, trans women are women, and they deserve as much safety and support as anybody else.
All right, well, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thank you, you're welcome.